We're going to hear first from Rainer Baake, who's Managing Director at Climate Neutrality Foundation and also Green Party stalwart. And rather than try to shoehorn these speakers into what I want to talk about, I'm going to let them have their head so they can tell you what they want to talk about and be less fascistic than I normally am when chairing panels. So, Rainer, so over to you. We're going to hear from these two guys to start with for about 15 minutes each, 10, 15 minutes each, something like that.
That's fine. Thank you very much. There's a very broad consensus in the international scientific community that by the middle of this century we have to become climate neutral if we want to prevent a very dangerous climate change. So every million tons of CO2 every year that we can be faster counts. And even though there are probably hundreds or maybe even thousands different steps to become climate neutral, I think they can be summarized in 4 crucial points. The first one is apply the efficiency first principle. Number 2, electrify everything that can be electrified and use renewable CO2-free electricity for that. And then there are certain areas where this direct electrification doesn't work, so we need indirect electrification. We need the green molecules, hydrogen, green hydrogen, and other derivatives. But again, this is also electrification. You first produce electricity from renewables, put them in an electrolyzer, and then produce the green molecules and other products after that. And then at the end, there is maybe a small portion of around 5%, at least that's the number in Germany, where efficiency, direct and indirect electrification doesn't work. That's mainly agriculture and certain areas of our industry like cement. There we need CCS or CCU, and we need to compensate because as long as you have cows, you have emissions from methane, and you need to do something to compensate these emissions. So do we need new inventions to become climate neutral? I'm absolutely positive we're going to see a lot of inventions, but I also want to be very clear, we do not need them because we have today the knowledge and we have the technologies to become climate neutral. But of course, and I very much hope so, we're going to see a lot of new technologies because they are going to make it easier and they're going to make it also economically more efficient to become climate neutral. So what policies do we need? What kind of regulation do we need? I think we need support mechanisms, like, for example, the support mechanism that Germany established for renewable energies back in the year 2000. That's pretty exactly 25 years ago now. Back then we had 6% renewables in our system, mainly hydro. Today we are almost at 60%. That's quite a success story in a very short period of time to get renewables into the market and go through these learning curves. Number 2, of course, we need standards, like emission standards for vehicles. And then, of course, we also need a CO2 pricing system. We established the emission trading system for industry and the power sector in 2005 in Europe. At the beginning, there was only a very small reduction of the cap, 1.72% at the very beginning, and then we changed it to minus 2.2% every year. Now, after the decision to become climate neutral, it goes down very steeply, and 2039 is the last year where you can buy allowances for the industry and the power sector. And we are starting a new emission trading system for heating and for transport, which is going to start 2027, and there also the cap goes down and it touches the 0 point in around 2043. So according to existing legislation, the sectors industry, power, transport, and heating, housing sector are going to be climate neutral before 2045. Are we going to see controversial debates on the way to that climate neutrality? Yes, that's not new. That's what we had during the entire time that we have been working on these instruments. And I'm sure that they're all coming back, especially the closer we come to these dates. I'm not afraid of those. But of course, there are some things that are absolutely new. And what is new is this very aggressive anti-climate policy of the new US administration. This is extremely harmful because it sends the wrong signals, and there will also be some countries hiding behind the United States. If the second bigger emitter doesn't participate, why should I? So we have difficult times ahead, but I think there are also some very good signs for hope. If I look at the international investments in the power sector, if I see where the money goes into renewable energies and into fossil technologies, there's way more money going into renewables. And why is that? Because they're cheaper. We have gone through the learning curve, and the cheapest way to produce electricity today is with wind and solar, and hydro if you have the wonderful mountains that you need for that. So what the US is doing is going to slow us down, no question about it. Are they going to be able to reverse this process? I am absolutely sure that they will not be able to do that because we have the investors on our side now. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. You also have your own domestic pressures in Germany now, with a very strong push by the right wing trying to inflame people's feelings against heat pumps and other energy measures. I mean, do you think that can be made to go away? Can you persuade people? Or perhaps have you been a bit slack in the past for letting these feelings develop without sort of taking them very seriously?
Well, first of all, we have some politicians who have been telling the public, don't worry, we'll take care of it. Everything is going to stay as it is. It will not. I think we need to be honest. Climate neutrality means that there is going to be changes. And during the first, I would say at least 2 or 3 decades maybe, depending on when you start to count, a lot of this energy transition happened behind the socket. Yeah? So
just explain that phrase. I'm not quite sure what the climate literacy is.
What it means. What I mean by that is, it was very much affecting what is happening behind the electric socket in terms of generation of electricity. So those, of course, who had their money invested in old technologies were not very keen of Germany moving towards renewable energies. It did not affect the normal consumer. Price sometimes became an issue, but otherwise there was no big effect. Now climate neutrality is moving into the garage, is moving into the heating cellar, and that, of course, is a process that should have been more carefully prepared. And some of our politicians, actually the majority, they decided on climate neutrality, but they were not very honest about what it actually means. And we need this debate, because there are changes. But it's not going to harm our standard of life. If you have ever driven an electric car, it's not worse than a combustion engine. There are lots of advantages. And once you come over that investment, it's actually cheaper to drive and maintain an electric vehicle. And if you have a heat pump, I think once you have one, you're pretty enthusiastic about what it can do. Yeah? But this transition, changing the minds, requires political communication, and we have not always done the best job on this. I would absolutely admit that. But look at what is happening right now in the German Bundestag. At the very moment here, the German Bundestag is deciding on a change of our constitution in terms of debt spending, changing the rules, and there are going to be hundreds of billions of euros now freed up for defense and also for infrastructure, and also especially for investments into climate neutrality. So we are moving. There's a broad 2/3 majority that wants to go that way, but I'm not saying that the debate is over. I think this is also a fight over public opinion, and we have to become better than we have done sometimes in the past.
I mean, you're under enormous pressure, of course, on defense spending because of the Ukraine situation. Do you think it's possible that the defense budget will just overwhelm the other budgets and actually there might not be much left for climate technology?
Well, as I said, right now, the German Bundestag, at this very moment, I was watching the news, they're taking a vote now, but I'm absolutely sure it's going to be a positive vote. They are lifting all the regulations on spending on defense and support for countries that have been invaded by other countries like Ukraine by Russia. There is no limit anymore on debt spending. Whatever it takes is now the new priority. Then there's going to be a package of 500 billion euros for the next 12 years, and that is going to be for infrastructure. Infrastructure is also grids and many other things, and heating systems. And there's a very clear allocation of 100 billion euros only for climate. That goes into our transformation fund, and I very much hope that it's going to be spent the right way. That's up, of course, for the new government, but many of us are going to watch out that this money goes the right way. There is not a lack of money right now. Yeah? We need smart policy now to organize the transition. The money issue is not the central one any longer.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it's interesting to see the situation in Germany. In the UK, we're going in exactly the opposite direction. And spending on renewables is now threatened because the Chancellor has set her own debt ceiling and has made so many pledges towards it. She's going to find it very hard to wind it back. Anyway, we have the second speaker.
May I just
Sorry, yeah, please.
One sentence. You know, when Russia invaded Ukraine, 2021, I was kind of afraid the priorities would shift. Because my experience, having been so many years in governments, it was always when the economy was running good, you could also do good climate and environment policy. And whenever there was an economic crisis, what you just said happened. We had a short debate in Europe and within the EU and also here in Germany after the invasion, and some people were arguing for let's slow that down and change our priorities. But then I think there was a very clear majority, and there still is, on the EU level and also in this country, saying our dependency, why we are in this squeeze, is imports of fossil fuels from other countries, especially from Russia. Natural gas, oil, etc., etc. So if we want to become independent and less vulnerable, we have to speed up the transformation. And that's what we're actually doing. And I think that's absolutely the right way.
Yeah, thank you. In England, the Conservative Party leader has only today given a speech saying that net zero is madness and will bankrupt the UK economy or bankrupt individual citizens. This is a woman who actually, when she was in power, made many, many speeches in favour of net zero. But the politics is looking it's too glittery. You know, she can't resist reaching out to grab it and try and shake people up. Anyway, we've got a second speaker now also from the German Green Party. They have different opinions. They are different people, as we will hear. Hans-Josef Fell, who is initiator of the Renewable Energy Act.
Thank you, Roger, for the introduction and for the invitation. I think to speak over renewable energies is much more than to speak over energy. And this is important when we look here to the topics on this World Forum. The topics of the World Forum are democracy, peace, and fight against poverty, and plenty more. I was infected into renewable energies in the 70s of the last centuries. I learned the war between Palestine and Israel, Yom Kippur War, and I could see that they cut the oil for the world. And afterwards I learned the Club of Rome, resources are limited. And some years later I could read about Jimmy Carter. He made a wonderful politics, and he told renewable energies would be the key for peace of US and in the world. And he is completely right. Because we see a lot of wars in the world, and when you look to the maps where the wars are, mostly are the wars in the regions where the oil and the gas comes from. And that's why we have a lot of wars about that. We see now, Rainer mentioned it already, we financed with oil and gas and coal and also nuclear technology the Russian budget for military. And we see also with the budget in the Arabian countries, Iran, the Houthis are financed from Iran is oil and gas money. Though when we go on with fossil and nuclear fuels, we will finance the dictators and the wars in the world. Switch to 100% renewables is one of the most important and decisive target to come to peace. But it is more. We can look to a study from the American lung doctors from 2019. The lung doctors told us, when we switch to 100% renewables and 100% e-mobility with electricity from renewables, we can cut billions of health costs, because the air pollution is mainly causing of lots of diseases. We see democracy with renewable energies. We can show it in Germany. People, whole villages, have now 100% renewables. They do produce electricity and heat and cooling, and for their cars, electric cars, their own energies from their own roofs and houses. They do not have the need to buy from big companies who produce oil, gas in oil fields and become richer and richer. And so the renewable energies is one of the most important pillars to come to fight against poverty in the world. Because people earn money, and not only a few big companies. And we have also a new introduction of a new economy. The coming economy is, that's clear, clean economy, not polluting economy. And therefore, we will see a lot of industry processes and others and new jobs. We can compare it and we can show it in Germany very easy. When we had 20 years ago 37 nuclear powers, we employed 40,000 people in the nuclear power stations. Now today we cut all nuclear power operation and we have 400,000 jobs, 10 times more than in the nuclear industry. So it is a job.
What are those jobs in?
The jobs are in operating, investing, in controlling, not so plenty in industry production. I will speak about that. It's mostly in China, but wind power is already in Germany and biogas is industry already in Germany and others. So this topic we must highlight more and more. But the jobs are in installing, operating, financing, planning, and plenty others. 400,000. That's amazing. And we can see that all the frames who are opposed against renewables are frames over social medias, over medias introduced by the fossil and nuclear industry. They want to tell us it would be impossible to operate 100% renewables decisive. I can invite them to my home in a cold winter time in Germany. My home is completely served with cars, with heating, with electricity by 100% renewables. I need no grid access. It is possible. I can show you villages who do it. I can show big scientific reports that the world can come on every place, on every hour of the year to 100% renewables. It is possible. We need no base load from nuclear or from natural gas. We have the mix of renewables. Solar and wind are the very big pillars. But when the sun is not shining, we can use stored bioenergy, harvest in the summertime, bring it to the winter time, and bring it to biogas only in the winter time, and then you get heat and electricity. The hydropower is flexible. Geothermal is flexible. And we can add storage systems, plenty. Batteries for short-time storage, hydropump power for short-time storage, redox flow batteries, and plenty others. Heat storages, and we can balance the fluctuances. And we can balance it also when we look with the demand. When we fill up the batteries, when we have too much sun, and empty them when we need the electricity. We can combine it. I do it in my house with bidirectional loading with the electric cars. There are so plenty batteries, so plenty storage systems. So it is no question that we can make it clearly. And I did not speak.
Sorry, just a quick question. How widespread is it in Germany that you can actually charge up your car with your own solar and then sell the surplus energy back to the...
It is a hard fight in the administration to allow it, but I learned it is not forbidden. So what not forbidden is, I can do. But it is already not yet allowed to go to the grid. You need a license from the grid operator and others. A lot of bureaucratic obstacles.
And they're still holding on to the power over that, over the influence, aren't they?
But we are working in Germany on that, and it is a clear target in the ministry that we want to have bidirectional loading allowance and will include it. So one of the most important topic, or the most important topic I did not mention already, were renewables are decisive. Climate protection. We all know when the temperature of the Earth rises more, then the humankind society is not safe. And we have to do much more. We have to not only, what Rainer mentioned, climate neutrality by 2050, we must bring it much faster and much earlier, and climate neutrality is not enough because the climate, the atmosphere is already overloaded with carbon. We have 425 parts per million carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. The last time, 7 million years ago, when we was in this Earth, the sea level was 20 meters higher, and in Canada were tropical rainwoods. That's what we stay now, some decades later. So we have to stop all emissions as fast as possible, and we have to clean the atmosphere. We must take out 300 gigatons carbon from the atmosphere. It is not easy, I know, but that's what we have to do. We want to create a research project. We call it Back to Holocene. We left already Holocene. And want to find the pathway on technology and economic way. How can we go with the carbon concentration under 350 parts per million? This is told to be the safe border for humankind. And I want to get a lot of support. And when we have that, then we must go to political advising how to do it. We know a lot about that. And we know that how to create renewables. 100% renewables would cut 60% of all emissions in the world. But that's not enough, because the rest of 40% emissions must also be cut. This is agriculture, intensive agriculture. This is an emission economy. We must come to a emission-free circular economy. For example, cancel petrochemical products and make products from algae, from plants, from everything else. It is possible. The technologies are clear. We have so plenty startups in the world, and we must push them. And to push them means push the market. When the consumers buy these products, then the factories will come. And we could see it with the Renewable Energy Act in 2000. We were told, Rainer knows it, it is impossible with renewable energies, they will not come, and we have no factories, how will you do it? It runs very fast. We had an increasing rate until 2012 with every year 60% more renewable solar investment every year. In wind power, every year 20. But it was slowed down. We had it in solar until 2012, and then was a switch to auctioning system and in wind power in 2018, and Germany declined. And this has two dramatic points. First is, when the increasing rate what we firstly stimulated we would be today at 100% renewables in electricity sector. And the second is, Germany would be the leader of the technologies and not China.
Well, you did.
China is today.
You did try, didn't you? You put policies in place, and then China took over the manufacturing. But the Germans were first with it, and I've chaired conferences in the past where I've asked people to give a round of applause to Germany for your policy on solar panels. So I haven't got a spare hand, but I give you half a one there. We're going to go to New York now. Golestan Sally Radwan, who's United Nations Environment Programme Chief Digital Officer, and hopefully you'll pick up a bit, if you would, Golestan, about new technologies that are coming through and that will be needed if we were going to aim for the targets set down by Hans-Josef, which actually I completely agree with. I think we're absolutely underplaying what needs to be done at the moment. We're not telling audiences the truth about just what a massive job it is. Net zero by 2050, forget it. That's inadequate. In my view, it's completely inadequate. But anyway, Golestan, please tell us your views.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me well. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm actually based in Nairobi, not New York. This is where the headquarters of the UN Environment Programme is, and we're very proud to be the only UN HQ in the Global South. But that also makes us very close to some of the effects of climate change and also other environmental degradation. I'm the Chief Digital Officer, as Roger said, so I'm going to focus a little bit on digital technologies, the digital economy, the good and the bad, as it were. So the two sides of the coin, as we call them. So if we're talking about 2030 and the SDGs, we already know that around 70% of SDG targets, so around 119 out of 169, would benefit from acceleration through digital technologies, while 13% of the targets actually directly call for the utilization of data and digital technologies to be realized. So this isn't just climate, this is across all of the 17 SDGs. Digital economy, of course, is booming, but of course it's also resource intensive. So like I said, we need to look at both sides of the coin. For instance, we know that e-commerce sales reached over almost $30 trillion in 2020 to 2023. But we also know that a 2-kilogram computer requires 800 kilograms of raw materials to be manufactured. And the ICT sector is not emission free. In fact, now with the AI revolution, and AI is certainly one of these technologies that hold great promise for achieving climate neutrality, among other environmental goals and aspirations. But AI has an environmental footprint that is as yet not fully explored and understood. There are numbers floating around, mainly with regards to the energy consumption by data centers, but the story is actually much bigger than that. So the story starts with raw materials, critical minerals and metals that go into the manufacturing of GPUs, for example. And the impact is not just on the utilization and use and depletion of resource material of these source materials themselves, but also on the impact they have on other things like conflicts and strife. So we know that 50% of copper mines, for example, are located in high water stress areas. Both of these things together have led and are leading to conflicts and strife in many regions of the world. And this, unfortunately, will only increase as our appetite and hunger for resource-intensive AI systems increases. So I would like to cover both aspects. Like I said, I'd like to talk about the promise of digitalization, especially also with focus on green jobs and the growth that they can lend both to the economy and to achieving economic goals, but then also warn a little bit against the impact of this digitalization as we go through it. So I mean, there are many things that can be done, and we can go through them if you want, with regards to trade agreements and the elimination or reduction, at least, of trade barriers in certain key sectors, and the introduction of policy frameworks to leverage digital technologies. But one thing we've noticed, for example, at UNEP, as we were going through the digital transformation strategies of many countries, and here I have to join Roger in applauding Germany for being one of the very few countries that actually took sustainability into account, especially environmental sustainability, when crafting their digital transformation strategy. Germany is only one of a handful of countries that even mention sustainability. The others, and there were over 60 countries, 60 UN member states that had digital transformation strategies that didn't even mention sustainability. And when we speak to our interlocutors in Nairobi, who usually represent ministries of environment and not digitalization, they aren't even aware of their country's technology plans or digital transformation strategies. So I think it's quite important from a policy perspective to link those two and to make sure that no digitalization strategy is complete without assessing its impact on the environment, but also its promise for achieving environmental targets, including climate neutrality. The other thing I want to mention is growth, economic growth. Of course, the argument that we're hearing now against the focus on green transition and climate goals is that it hinders economic growth. And I don't think that argument is completely sound. I think one cannot survive without the other. It's built into the word sustainable. Otherwise, it's unsustainable. And the other thing is that there are very clear links between the environmental agenda, especially the climate agenda, and the economic growth agenda. There are very strong relationships between climate, for example, and migration patterns, biodiversity loss, land degradation, food security, supply chain disruption, like I said before, conflicts and strife, and so on. And so we need to look more closely at these causes and effects and how we can craft a narrative and craft strong use cases, and technology can help a lot here, that make this story evident and really make the business case for more investment in environmental goals backed up by technology. I think the technologies are mostly here. AI, like I said, holds a very strong promise, but also even more, I would say, more basic data analysis techniques that we can use to advance this agenda. I think what's missing is the political will and also the ability to link both of these narratives and both of these agendas. But taking circularity as an example of an economic growth area, and we know it forms an important part of many multilateral environmental agreements, but we also know that circularity can unlock around $4.5 trillion in economic growth, and it can create up to 6 million jobs through activities like recycling, repair, renting, remanufacturing, etc., etc. But we're not really looking at it as a job creator as much as a burden that we need to, that it would cost us a lot of economic capital to be able to implement, and that it would hamper growth and hamper innovation, which I think is not true. So I think what we need is new business models, ones that are created through and with technology, design products and services based on resource efficiency. We have something called the 9 R's, which many of you might be familiar with: refuse, reduce, reuse, repair, refill, remanufacture, repurpose, and recycle. So these 9 R's need to be taken into account, especially that we know that 80% of the environmental impacts of products are determined at the design stage. So I think we need a whole rethinking of the product design, product manufacturing, sustainable consumption and production, and also the kinds of jobs and opportunities that are created through combining the environmental agenda with the digital and technology agenda. Finally, I'll focus on the other side of the coin a little bit, which is what I started with. The impact of technologies such as AI needs to be understood. That is not to say that it's necessarily all bad. I think we need to achieve a balance between the environmental footprint of technologies such as AI and the benefits they can bring. Something like a net impact calculation of what AI can bring to us. But we can't have very large language models that are extremely resource intensive. I talked earlier about the usage of raw materials. You talked a lot about energy consumption in general. And of course, AI data centers are particularly energy hungry, and there are all sorts of scary statistics being thrown around. Water consumption for cooling is extremely high, and water is now, again, a basis for a lot of conflicts around the world. But then also circularity, as we talked about, not to mention the secondary and tertiary effects of the proliferation of AI systems, like the misinformation and disinformation through the generation of fake content, major shifts that we're seeing in different sectors due to the AI revolution, overconsumption of unsustainable products, and so on. So we need to take a fair and science-based look at that entire value chain and evaluate it, and maybe come up with something like an individual footprint for AI, like we have for the aviation sector, for example, the carbon footprint when we fly. So every time I use ChatGPT or DeepSeek or any other model, how much am I costing the environment? And do I really need to use an AI model every time I want to do a web search? Or is a simple web search through one of the more conventional search engines the better way? Do we really need to invest in growing AI-powered social media and image and content generation just to put a nice bow on our cats, rather than investing in how AI can be used, for example, to optimize energy consumption and grid energy mix in different countries? So these are the questions I think that we should put front and center while we try to link the environmental agenda with the development agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm sorry to mix your geography. I've been to UNEP many times. In fact, I think the last time I was in Kenya was for the plastic bag ban, in which Kenya led the world, actually, didn't it, in banning plastic bags, which has now been followed throughout much of Africa. And that was, you could see that was an easy intervention by the government. Here is a problem. You can see the bags are blocking the water courses. You can see that's causing flooding. Therefore, we ban the bags. However inconvenient it is, you have a paper bag and your shopping falls through the bottom of it on a wet day, and however inconvenient, we're going to ban the bags. You're talking about AI, and it strikes me that, I mean, at the moment, AI is charging ahead with no real attempt to legislate it. And, you know, people have no idea, really, about what the future will be. I spent a lot of last night with an AI entrepreneur who said, oh, we have all these good things coming from AI. And I said, yeah, but you may have a load of bad things as well. The truth is, you don't know. And I wonder how governments can behave in the face of that massive level of uncertainty.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And to your comment about plastic bags, that's a very good argument for simplification, actually. So if you look at the history of the UN, and especially UNEP, and what's the biggest success we've achieved, and it's in ozone. Because when we talked about ozone, we talked about just one simple target and nothing else. Now we seem to be looking at hundreds and in some cases even thousands of indicators that no one can really measure. So I think simplifying and taking it one by one, and specific interventions by specific countries that can serve, as you said, as an example for others. I see that my image has disappeared. Sorry about that. Probably a bandwidth issue, but I hope you can still hear me okay. So on AI, yes, I think global AI governance is a really important and also a really difficult issue. And I think we need to try as much as possible to strip away the politics of it. And I find that, like in many discussions now, what's happening... Sorry, can you still hear me?
Yes.
Sorry, you just dropped off then.
Can you still hear me?
Yeah, just keep going. We'll see how we go.
Okay. So I find that the AI discussion is as polarized as many topics these days, unfortunately. There's a camp that says AI is all good and another camp that says AI is all bad. And there aren't enough kind of sage and wise voices in the middle trying to bring those two viewpoints together. So it's not true that attempting to regulate AI would hamper innovation necessarily. It only does so if we don't do it in a smart way. But to get to a quick answer to your question, Roger, I think it starts with regulating specific things, specific use cases of AI, specific types of technology that we want to prioritize, and specific ways in which we're allowed to use it and exchange it around the world. I think rather than trying to boil the ocean in one big AI governance blob of laws and rules and regulations, I think we should start with the highest impact, not only sectors, but subsectoral applications where AI stands to play a strong role, but also has the highest, let's say, environmental impact. And start by regulating those. And I'll give you an example. At UNEP, we're now really calling for a scientific understanding of the AI value chain that I talked about a few minutes ago. We're just trying to understand and quantify how does AI use water? How does AI use raw materials? How does AI generate waste and e-waste? And what should we measure in a simple and understandable way along that entire value chain? And then how do we curb it? Is it exceeding certain threshold that we all should agree on? And if it is, how do we mitigate that? So it starts with simple things like that then allow us to say, okay, what are the interventions that we need to put in place? Rather than starting with this big, hairy goal of, oh, AI needs to be regulated or AI needs to be stopped, because that then leads to a strong reaction from the other side saying, oh, no, you can't. You'll be hampering our innovation. You'll be stopping us. So this is where I would start.
What institutions or authorities would you trust to do those calculations on AI? And I would guess probably that it would be realistic that such initiatives wouldn't come from Africa, that the parameters would be determined elsewhere, almost certainly in somewhere between the USA and China. So leaving Africa as a recipient of wisdom, however much wisdom there could be. Does that worry you at all?
Very much so. And this is why I think it needs to be a global effort and an intergovernmental effort. It can't be left to whatever leading powers decide to impose their own priorities on the rest of the world. And we had a number of roundtable discussions around this, where many African countries were heavily engaged and involved. And of course, they worry about this, but they also have a lot of thought leadership to lend. Because many of the natural resources that go into that value chain come from Africa, and a lot of the e-waste that gets generated by the ICT industry lands in Africa. And so they have a very big stake to play in this. And at the same time, they also want to be players in the AI innovation space. So I think governments need to be definitely involved, but also this needs to go beyond government. It needs to be various UN organizations, various NGOs, the civil society, but also research organizations, universities, research centers around the world, that can really lend this objective scientific lens to the research, so that whatever policy discussions we're having are based on solid science and not on kind of emotional ideologies one way or the other.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Golestan. We might try and reset your signal while we're hearing from the next speaker. So please, guys, panel, do come back. Rushad Nanavalti is Director of Third Derivative at the Rocky Mountain Institute on Climate Technology Accelerator. He's helped more than 100 startups. I should say I first came across Rocky Mountain Institute maybe 30 years ago or something like that. They're fantastically inventive and practical and clever and resourceful institute based, funnily enough, in the Rocky Mountains. Anyway, you're going to be hopefully optimistic about changes and breakthroughs and jobs, hopefully. Do bring your mic a bit nearer.
I'll do my best. Thank you. Thank you for that kind introduction, Roger. So Third Derivative, as Roger said, is a global climate technology accelerator. And what that means is, in a nutshell, is that we're in the business of helping really, really promising, critical, but early stage climate technologies move as fast as they can to commercialization. Why does that matter? In the context of the energy transition, about a third of the technologies that we need to get to net zero are immature, are still only at a pilot or demonstration stage. And,
could you just say what they are, in your opinion?
Like examples of technologies?
Yeah.
This gets to Rainer's point, right? They may have been invented, but they're not mature. So decarbonizing steel is a great example.
Yep.
We know how to do it. We know how to produce emissions-free steel. There is only one commercial scale green steel plant in development in the world today. So it's things like decarbonizing steel, cement, materials, taking the, to borrow again from Rainer's framework, taking carbon actually out of the Earth system. Those are the types of technologies that haven't reached the level of commercial maturity that we've seen with things like wind and solar and batteries. So that's what we tend to focus on. I'm going to try to relate my comments to what the previous speakers have said already, because I learned a lot from them. The way I think about this class of technologies is that there are three types of it. There's the first is what I think of as climate tech as an accelerant. These are technologies that are critical to making the deployment of relatively mature clean energy technologies like wind, solar, batteries faster or easier or smoother. The second are technologies that are really trying to solve end game challenges, these really difficult decarbonization challenges, sometimes referred to as the hard to abate sectors. I think the more accurate way to think about them is as the hard to electrify sectors, to your point, Rainer. And then there's a third category, which I think of as climate technology as a potential game changer. Technologies that not only have decarbonization impact, but can fundamentally alter system dynamics in markets and supply chains. So these are things like nuclear fusion or geological hydrogen or artificial intelligence. And I'll give you sort of maybe a couple of examples of technologies that for me fall into each of these categories. So we need to get to 100% renewables, which obviously has been your mission. And in order to do that, faster and quicker and cheaper, you need things like long duration energy storage. You need advanced transmission solutions. You need utilities to become much better at things like sensing and controls and intelligence. In that second category of these climate technologies that you need for these endgame challenges, we need to figure out ways, much more efficient, less energy intensive ways to decarbonize things like steel and cement and chemicals. And you could argue that some of these technologies, again, to Rainer's point, exist, but hydrogen-based direct reduction of steel making is incredibly energy intensive, and innovation has a really, really strong or important role to play in terms of figuring out better ways to solve challenges like that. Picking on AI as an example in that final category of things that really could serve as massive game changers, I agree with a lot of what Sally said. We don't really know how this is going to play out. And Sally pointed to a couple of very serious issues or implications on the negative side of the ledger, which are concerns around energy consumptions and materials use. The third, which I don't think gets nearly as much attention, is the notion of enabled emissions. And I borrow that phrase from a couple of ex-Microsoft employees who've done incredibly good and brave work on this topic. When you think about the environmental impact associated with the tech giants, the companies like Microsoft or Google or an Apple, their own operational emissions and even the emissions associated with their data center operations pale in comparison to the broader impact that their softwares have on the world. The companies right now that are in the best position to take advantage of advances in AI are the big incumbents, and that includes oil and gas companies. One of the most effective use case for a lot of advanced machine learning is things like subsurface modeling for oil and gas exploration. And analysis that they did showed that just the incremental impact associated with one or two projects that Microsoft serves outstrip any operational emissions that are attributable to Microsoft or these tech giants themselves. So that's another dimension of the problem that is massive, but doesn't get remarked upon as much. But I do want to end on the optimistic note, because we're very excited about the potential for things like using AI for materials discovery, things like catalyst, enzymes, microbes, for the optimization of industrial processes in order to bring greater efficiency to it, with respect to things like solving the renewables integration challenge. But where we are right now is that represents potential. The negative impacts, however, are very, very real. The last thing I'll say is that I think one of the reasons I've managed to stay optimistic in my job is the fact that we have incredible companies, actually more like 250 right now in the portfolio, that really represent this ethos of applied hope that RMI has always subscribed to, taking on and finding ways to solve many of the most difficult science and engineering problems associated with climate and the energy transition.
Thank you. I have actually been to the world's first carbon neutral steel plant. I think it's still on the web. I might give you some details later. It's a fascinating place. But what struck me really was a strong proponent of green steel applauded this place, but just remarked that there wasn't remotely enough hydrogen to fuel it, more than a certain number. And it just struck me that, we've been so slack to get on this case. Or like last week I chaired a symposium on ammonia in shipping. And they were all very enthusiastic about the use of ammonia in shipping. Yeah. But then somebody said, but it would take solar energy the size of France in order to power the world shipping fleet. Yeah. I mean, these are things that look like almost unimaginable.
Yeah. This is exactly why innovation and invention still has a really important role to play. So I'll talk about both. So steelmaking, the closest thing to an incumbent decarbonization technology we have is reducing iron by basically combusting hydrogen instead of coking coal. That's what we have. And as you point out, that's predicated on massive amounts of hydrogen, which is predicated on massive amounts of renewable electricity to run the electrolyzers to produce it. But invention and innovation offer you alternative pathways. There are ways to reduce iron which don't rely on any form of combustion. And a couple that I'm excited about are using hydrogen plasma instead of hydrogen gas, using lasers for smelting instead of using, again, combusting natural gas or hydrogen or coking coal. And so there are ways to get around some of these very, very significant bottlenecks that you've pointed out. On hydrogen, the only way we really produce green hydrogen, not very much of it, is through electrolysis, which again, requires massive amounts of renewable electricity. But there are other ways to produce green hydrogen and its sort of successor energy carrier molecule, ammonia, which don't rely on that. One of the potential game-changing technologies I cited, for example, is geological hydrogen, which we're just starting to appreciate the potential for. And in a nutshell, that's essentially drilling from it and extracting it from natural deposits versus having to produce it via electrolysis. So you're absolutely right. When you look at things like green ammonia, sustainable aviation fuel, decarbonizing steel and cement, the pathways that are most mature may not be the pathways that will ultimately win, and they're certainly not the pathways that will likely be the best or most efficient way to address these problems, and which is precisely why we do the work that we do.
Okay, thank you. Rainer and Hans-Josef, you both wanted to come in. Rainer first.
Well, first of all, I really want to applaud, because what you're doing is exactly what we need now. Number two, I don't know which green steel plant you visited, because as far as I know, there is none yet, but there will very soon be one.
It's up and running, it's just not producing in commercial quantities yet.
Exactly. So steel is very important, because if you look at the different industries, there is no other technology or industrial production that is responsible for more greenhouse gases than the steel sector. And what is causing these CO2 emissions? It's the first step of reducing iron ore to iron, and that means taking the oxygen out. There are new ways of doing that. I happen to be also the special envoy for the partnership between Germany and Namibia. And in 2 weeks, there is a new plant starting now to produce the first green iron, that is reduced iron ore through hydrogen. And what they are doing is renewable energy, solar, at a very, very low price, very, very low price. Then they have an electrolyzer, they produce green hydrogen, and then they have a new machine where they put together that hydrogen with the iron ore. The hydrogen takes the O out of the iron ore, and at the end water falls out again, so they can run the water in cycle. And they're delivering it to a German company that is active in the automotive industry, so there's going to be the first green steel then, because iron ore is not steel. Yeah? I mean, iron ore, you turn it into iron, and then from iron you make steel. So this process is starting now. And the amazing part is that there are so many more options. I mean, this company is starting now. The second phase is already planned 10 times, and then they're going to be producing 1 million tons if they get the money from maybe people like you. Yeah? So there are huge potentials of doing that. And if I look at what is happening in Germany, if you look at our big steel plants, the coal doesn't come from Germany anymore. It comes from South Africa, from Colombia, from Australia. The iron ore comes from the Amazon basin, from South Africa, Sweden, and so on. So this very first step is now happening under completely different conditions at a really, really low price. And this company, they just told me a couple of days ago, can produce in the next phase by 2029, 2030, green iron, reduced iron ore, green iron at the same price as we do right now with coal, and very emission intensive. So we see some amazing developments. And what is, I mean, this is something that if you would have told me that a year ago, I wouldn't have believed it. one of the last times I was visiting, they said we can also use that green iron to produce hydrogen again. I said, how do you do that? They said, well, actually, many years ago, more than 100 years ago, the first hydrogen was produced from iron. Did you know that?
Yeah.
I didn't know it. So they said, we have done tests, and we take that green iron ore, this green iron, we take that green iron, bring it together with water, and it starts to producing hydrogen. I said, well, that is wonderful, because we are talking about backup capacity. How do we make sure that our electricity system is running also in those times when there's not sufficient wind and solar and the other renewable energies? Yeah? So green iron is also a long-term storage material. So I asked this very competent Norwegian company to take a look and make a cost comparison, and guess what came out? They're looking at 3 different value chains: producing green hydrogen in Germany, storing it in caverns, and then using it in generators, or use green ammonia, crack it, and then use it, or use green iron. And green iron was the cheapest one. So there are some very new inventions. This is what I talked about before. We do have the technologies, but these inventions are going to make this transition much, much cheaper. And I think we're just at the very beginning of a real revolution. And that is going to be a revolution that makes it cheaper if we cooperate internationally.
Well, let's hope so. I think a final word for you.
And have a better opinion. I don't believe in green hydrogen. It is too expensive, and it will remain too expensive because it is high inefficient, and inefficiency leads to high cost. I was at my first inauguration in a hydrogen production in 1995. It does not operate. 1 year later, it was cancelled. I was the second one, the third one, the fifth one, and the second one. I was on plenty of inaugurations on hydrogen in 2010, in 2015, and others. When you look now, hydrogen buses and others, all are cancelled. There is no chance. We have other solutions in this. Green steel, for example. We can produce concrete without steel. Bamboo and concrete, or with other plants, that replace 50% of all steel in the world when we go this way. Yes, we need steel for other products, no question, but we can produce steel as well with biochar, with biocoal. Now, this is possible. And this comes from municipal waste and others. That are solutions that are not in the view of plenty developers, but they are much easier and much cheaper. So we should look to more solutions. Concrete, for example. We have the first startups who make a cement that takes the carbon from the atmosphere when the cement becomes hard. So we have so plenty solutions otherwise than hydrogen. Hydrogen can play a role in storage for the winter time, from the summertime, in decentralized level. Yes, I see some aspects, but I do not see the hydrogen in traffic, not in heating, and not in plenty areas in the industry. Last point, petrochemical. We could hear it's a huge plastic problem. Yes, I'm happy about a plastic bag ban. But what does it help? We have so plenty other plastics that pollute the marine and others. The only solution is to make plastic a bioplastic from the plants, from the algae and others, that you can make a circular economy. This plastic goes back to the soil and is the stimulation for the new plants that they can grow. That's a circular economy, and not only a ban. We must ban petrochemicals, but not bioplastic. That's important.
I looked into this into a documentary a couple of years ago, and unfortunately it was the same conclusion for the green steel, that if we wanted to use biomaterials on a large scale, they would be immediately in competition with food demand.
No.
So anyway,
I disagree.
That's fine. That was the opinion of the firm that was making the stuff.
That's mostly the argument coming from the steel industry. The same coming from the fossil industry when you speak over bioenergy. The hunger has other problems in the world. The hunger is that we produce at the moment food for 10 billion people. But we have hunger because we cannot distribute enough the food and other things. We must look to the really hunger problems. I
take your point. It's just that it wasn't my opinion. It was the opinion of the firm that were making the bioplastic. Anyway, I just want to give the last word now to Rushad because I hope he'll say something optimistic.
I am optimistic. I have 250 reasons to be optimistic. Look, I work with entrepreneurs. The thing, and I get asked this question, like I might be a little younger than you, maybe by a year or two, but I've been working in this space for close to 2 decades now, and people ask me, how can you remain optimistic, especially in light of what's happened between November, whatever it was last year, and where we are today, and.
Well, you used a phrase, something optimism.
Applied hope.
Applied hope,
yeah.
Yes. I thought that was interesting. What is applied hope?
It's the RMI mantra, which is basically not what Amory Lovins, our co-founder, described as just mere glandular optimism, this sort of airy-fairy belief that things are going to be fine, but hope with its sleeves rolled up. Hope that is predicated on you actually doing the work to realize what you're trying to achieve. And the embodiment of that is the founders, the entrepreneurs that we work with. And I think the thing that gives me the greatest cause for hope/optimism is the fact that many of the brightest minds in the world are working on these problems. When I started my career, I felt like, the place that the best and the brightest would often gravitate towards was places like Goldman Sachs or McKinsey. Fast forward 10 years, it was Google and Facebook, what was called Facebook. But today, I honestly believe that many of the most brilliant, committed, interesting human beings on the earth are trying to solve these problems. That's my primary cause for optimism.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much. Golestan, I don't know whether you're still with us in Nairobi or New York, for that matter. So anyway, goodbye and thank you if you're there. And
thank you.
And perhaps
Bye.
the rest of us can thank the rest of the panel who are actually here in person.